Joining us now via Skype is a financial analyst and an economist, Akin Omishade. Akin, good morning. It's good to have you join us on TVC Breakfast this morning. Now, when it comes to the issue of borrowing, any average economist or business person would say there's nothing wrong in borrowing. It's a normal thing in business and to keep things going. But are there concerns the way that we're borrowing right now, especially when we hear voices from international organizations like the IMF and the World Bank saying, Nigeria, you need to watch the level of borrowing? What concerns do you have?
Yeah, good morning and thank you.
Morning.
Indeed, the level of borrowing is concerning. We have a borrowing that has increased in the first quarter by 3.11%, and from 2018 to 2019 to 12.72%. And the amount of borrowing so far, if you look at the percentage, that means this year, if Nigeria goes ahead to borrow this 30 billion, we'll be having a debt management portfolio of about 50 to 65%. That means already we are working in deficit. We have just over 2 trillion naira deficit in our budget. And then what next? We are now, the expected revenue will now be used to service these debts. So the economies of it just does not make sense. We are generating money to service debt, and we are borrowing more. It is true the World Bank, the IMF, and actually the World Credit Rating Agencies have rated Nigeria from stable to negative. So it is very worrying. Whatever monies we are making, we are paying back to New York, to Frankfurt, to Paris, to London to service these debts.
Yeah, so what's the way to go now? Minister Raji Fashola had already said that, yes, it's legitimate concern for people to talk about Nigeria's debt profile, but then it's also a legitimate desire for Nigerians to want a better life and infrastructure.
Well, it is true. The only way to get out of this logjam or to get out of this slowness, the instability in our economy is to spend. The question is, what is this money, these loans, what are they going to be spent on? Are they going to be spent on developmental projects? Are they going to be spent on infrastructural projects? That's the question. These 30 billion, the ministers have stated that they will be spent on infrastructural development projects and to create jobs. How much jobs? In what sectors are those jobs going to be created? And don't also forget that this is not a fresh loan request. This is a request that has been made to the 8th Assembly. And this is just being brought forward now because it was not approved then. It is true, we need to spend out of this situation. But why can't we generate internally? The infrastructures that we have presently, why don't we make them better rather than borrowing more? Because you are borrowing more at higher interest rates, you are adding debt upon debt, and what will happen at the end of the day is the government will have to probably print more money, and then we'll have inflation, and it's a vicious cycle.
Also said at that hearing that this particular loan, if well managed and if the needs are well met now, looking at the rail project, for instance, could last for as much as 100 years. It brings us to the question of how well do we manage our capital projects in the country?
Well, that is very true. And it's a bit of a concern that we have almost a below par attitude to management of capital expenditures, as you've said. For example, you will notice that the Lagos-Ibadan rail project is already suffering setbacks from the acts of vandalism by the populace itself, the beneficiaries of this project. Equally, you mentioned something about the rising debt profile of Nigeria, and you will recall that the only way known that we could get out of this debt burden is there are three ways. We convert the debt, we seek for debt forgiveness, so that will give us some breathing space or we refinance this debt, just like the Obasanjo regime did, and got 30 billion debt forgiveness. But when you talk about capital expenditure and how to maintain it, the issue is, are these projects, will they generate revenue to repay the debt? You cannot borrow to spend on projects that will not refinance or repay the debt. For example, the rail project, how much will the rail project bring back into the economy? Is it just to meet the welfare needs? But then if it's just to meet the welfare needs, then that is a misplaced project. And that is the concern of the international community, that and the members of the House of Reps rightfully asking those questions. What is the government spending these loans on? For example, if the money is spent on energy project, telecommunications, then you know that there's going to be a return on investment. But in this case, it's been spent on consuming projects. The rail project, we don't know how much that will bring in 5 years, in 6 years, in 10 years. Will that rail project still be available in 10 years' time? Those are issues that any economist or any financial analyst will be seeking answers for. But the government is silent on this side of the question. We have answers that, yes, these are needs, these are requirements for the nation, but will this repay the debts? My own humble answer is they wouldn't repay the debts.
About the budget, especially where all these critical projects are concerned, there's also been this bit now that there hasn't never really been a time where the budget would meet all the needs. It has always gone on to deficit. Is that a big worry for you?
It is a big worry because there have been successive governments that have had carryovers of deficits, and this government inherited deficits as well. So it's a vicious cycle that is going on, and it will affect our credit rating as it has done recently. We've been downgraded from stable to unstable, and now we're in negative. The major credit rating agencies in the world, Standard & Poor's, Moody, Fitch, Lynch & Fitch, that has downgraded Nigeria. So it even makes the cost of borrowing higher than it should ordinarily have been. It is not making Nigeria a favorable destination for investors. So yes, this rising cost and rising borrowing is a big worry. Not only that, when Nigeria is borrowing, then there is debt vulnerability. Are we able to repay? And that makes our economy or expected growth or unreliable or unstable.
All right, now, Akin, a lot of people have said that the federal government is not involving the private sector enough when it comes to using them to handle some of these projects where they bring their capital in and look for a way of recouping over a long period of time so that they can hands off and concentrate on other developmental projects like you were saying. What do you say to this?
I agree. And the model that has worked in many jurisdictions, in many countries, is for the government to go into private partnership projects, public-private projects with the private sector. And what will happen is, over time, as government is encouraging public-private partnership in all these infrastructural projects, over time, the involvement of government will depreciate, and the private sector will be enabled to carry on. And then what we'll have more privatized enterprises, and there'll be more competition, and there'll be more investment, because once there's competition amongst private players in the infrastructural space, there'll be more competition, which eventually should expectedly drive prices, consumer prices down. Our consumer price index is on the increase because there's no competition, there is no investment. And how much can government continually invest in these infrastructures? For example, you take the Lagos-Ibadan rail project. If that had been done on a PPP basis, most likely that project would have been completed. It would have been the fares would have been priced for a private initiative. The government will be recouping monies, its investment. The private sector will also be recouping. It will aid transportation of goods and services. So definitely, if the government can participate or partner with reliable private investors, that is the way to go.
All right. Thank you very much, Akin Omishade, for talking to us on TVC Breakfast this morning.